In this video, we are going to install the Entity Framework Core tools. With this tool, the application that we are going to build in this course consists of two parts, a front end and a back end. In our case, when we talk about the front end, we refer to the web application with which the user interacts directly. It is the page that contains buttons, forms, text, and others, which the user will use directly. On the other hand, when we refer to the backend, we're talking about an application that lives on a server, to which the user has access through the front end. For example, if the user wants to save a record, the record will interact with the front end, and the front end will communicate with the backend to perform the save operation. It is important to have a backend because that way we can centralize operations of our solutions. For example, we could have two front ends, a web application and a mobile application, and both communicate with the same backend located on a web server. We usually have two options when we work with a front-end application with its ASP.NET Core backend. The first option is to have both projects separated, and the second option is to have both projects together. The advantage of having separate projects is being able to publish them independently. That is, have the front end in one place and the back end in another place. This is the most common way of working, and it is the one that we're going to use in this course. The second way, the one of having both projects together, forces us to have a front end and back end in the same project. It is not normal to do it in this way for several reasons. Two that I highlight. One, normally front end and back end are worked by different people with different skills, so having both together does not make sense. Second, it forces you to always deploy both together, making it difficult for one to evolve independently of the other. I am going to teach you how to create a project with front end and back end together, but it is not the way I will work throughout the course. Throughout the course, I will have a project for the back end technology and another project for the front-end technology, and that way we will be able in the end to deploy them separately. In this video, we are going to create our React application. As we said before, we are going to use create React app so that we can use a command line to create our project that will be configured to use React. So let me go to a folder like this one, and I will open a terminal that points to this folder. So I will say Shift right click, open PowerShell window here. I will put the terminal here, and I will issue the following command: npx create react app react movies --template TypeScript. We are going to use TypeScript in our project. I'll press enter. TypeScript will allow us to have a type-safe system that won't allow us to send the wrong parameters to functions and components so that we don't make silly mistakes. TypeScript is a superset of JavaScript that adds a few features to it, and one of those features is the type system. Just like in C#, we are going to be able to declare variables with a type, and we have to respect the shape of that type. This basically adds a static analysis to our code base, so that we can catch errors as we are developing our application. It is not mandatory to use TypeScript in React, as we can use other tools like prop types, but we are going to choose to use TypeScript because TypeScript can be used with any single function or part of our application, while prop types can only be used in components. We're going to learn more about prop types in a later video. For now, as we can see, our project has been built, so I will say cd react tap enter, and here I want to open my project using Visual Studio Code, so I will say code dot, what it does is to use Visual Studio Code to open the current folder in which I am in. So let me press enter, and this will open our React application. As you can see, we have src, and here we have this app.tsx, which is our main component for our application. We're going to build more components as we progress in the course, but this is what we have right now. Now I want to run my application, so for that we can go to a terminal. Here Visual Studio Code has a terminal, so we're going to use that. Let me go to terminal, new terminal, and in order to run our application I have to say npm start, and then let me press enter, and that's it. With this we're going to run our application. And as you can see, this is a really simple application. We only have the React logo here and some text. Now it says something. It says edit the app.tsx file and save to reload. This means that React uses something that is called hot reload, which is going to only update here in the UI whatever I update in the source code, and it will not update anything else. We're going to see an example of that in the future. For now, let me just update my project so that we can see that it is indeed working. So let's come here and I will add exclamation marks and I will save, and I will come back here and you are going to see that immediately we get this updated. We can put them side by side just so that you can see that immediately after saving, let me put this here. Here is fine. Let me come here and I will remove the exclamation marks and I will save Ctrl S, and as you can see it was updated here. Something else that I want you to do is to install the React developer tools, which can help you in the future when you are developing React applications. So let me put this in here and let me go to Google. Let's say React Developer Tools Chrome, and you're going to see that we are redirected here into an extension which I already have it installed. And then because I have it installed, I can come here and I can click on here, and as you can see we have React Developer Tools. I can click on here and it says that this page is using development build of React, which means that we are in development and not in production, which is fine. Now let me press F12 and let's go here to components. Because I installed the extension React Developer Tools, I have access to some tools here that will allow me to analyze my application from Google Chrome, and this will allow me to do some testing, do some analyzing, maybe to debug things or to do some testing. For example, here we have these props. Props refers to properties. Components can receive properties, and in here I will be able to modify live those properties. I can write whatever I want here, and I will be able to send that property into the component and see how the component behaves with the new parameter. Again, this is great for testing, and you will be able to see the whole structure of your application. Now, of course, right now we have a very boring component, so there is not much to see here. But just so you know, you have this tool here that will allow you to analyze your application from Google Chrome. In this video, we are going to create our web API using Visual Studio. So let me open Visual Studio, and here we are in this screen. Let me say create new project, and in here in this bar I need to write web API so that we get the web API template, which is this one. So let me say next, and I will name this movies API, and I will put this address in which we are as the location where I want to put my project. So let me say next, and we're going to use .NET 6. I will say configure for HTTPS and enable OpenAPI support, and I will click on create. We are going to see what OpenAPI is in just a minute. The web API is the backend that our React application is going to use to talk to the database and do other kind of operations. Now here we can go to the Solution Explorer, and here we have the files of our web API. Here we have controllers, and I can expand controllers and click on Weather Forecast Controller, and this is a controller, which is a class that will run when our web API receives an HTTP request. And what we're going to do is that we're going to run this get method that we have here if we receive an HTTP get request into the endpoint weather forecast. We will talk more about ASP.NET Core in the future. We have a dedicated module just for learning the basics of ASP.NET Core for Web API, so there we will learn this step by step. But for now I just want to test this, so I will press Ctrl F5 to run my application, and this will open this page. This is the OpenAPI support I was mentioning before. With OpenAPI we have a standard that allows us to represent the endpoints of our web API so that other systems can understand our web API, our API, the endpoints that they can consult. Again, we will talk more about this later in the future. For now, I just want to make an HTTP GET request into this endpoint that I have here. I can do it in two ways. The first one will be to click here, then try it out, execute, and here as you can see we got a response from our server to this URL. And the second way will be to take this and just paste it here and press enter, and you can see that we get the exact same response here in the browser. Now, if you are seeing something different in your PC, if you are seeing something not as styled as this, it is because I have an extension in Chrome that beautifies JSON responses. If you want to use it, just go to google.com and say JSON View Chrome. The name of the extension is JSON View. So you click on here and then you can install this extension, which I already have, and then you will be able to come here and you will have this JSON data shown in a friendly manner. Now let's do all of this but with Visual Studio Code and the .NET CLI. In this video, we are going to create our web API using the .NET CLI, and then we are going to run it using Visual Studio Code. So for that, we have to go to a terminal because it is in there that we can use the .NET CLI. So let me shift right click here and say open PowerShell window here so that I can have a terminal pointing to this folder, and in here I can say .NET new, enter, and this will give me the list of options that I have to create either a file or a whole solution using the .NET CLI. For example, here we have console for console applications. Here we have WinForms for WinForm applications. We have page for Razor pages, Blazor server and Blazor WASM. But what we're looking for is Web API. With this, we can create an ASP.NET Core application configured to be a Web API. So let's do that. I will say .NET new Web API -o, which means output, because I want to output the project into Movies API, which is going to be a folder in which I am going to put my project. So let me press enter, and this will create our Movies API project, and it is done. Now I will say cd movies tab, enter, and then I will say code dot in order to open my web API using Visual Studio Code, and here it is. Now as you can see here on the left, we have the files of our project. We have this controllers folder, and here we have a controller. We are going to study this structure and these files later in the future in a dedicated module that we have only for learning the basics of Web API development with ASP.NET Core. But for now, let's just see this class, this Weather Forecast Controller class, which is a controller, which means that this is a class that contains methods that will run in response to an HTTP request made to our Web API. And in this case, we only have one method here, which is this get, which is a method that will run when an HTTP GET request gets made into our web API, specifically into this endpoint that we have here, which is equal to weather forecast. Again, we're going to talk more in detail about this in the future, but for now, I just want to test our web API. So let me run it. In order to run it, I need a terminal, so let me go to terminal here, new terminal, and in here I will say .NET run, and I'll press enter, and here as you can see we have two URLs through which we can go to our application. I will use the one that says HTTPS localhost 5001, so control click here, and you are going to see that we are getting a 404 because there is nothing at this address. But if I go to /swagger, you are going to see that we get this Swagger page here. What is this? This is OpenAPI in action. OpenAPI refers to a standard that we can use in order to present the endpoints of our web API in such a way that other systems can use. So basically, through this Swagger page, users can inspect and learn about how to use our web API. For example, here we have this endpoint weather forecast, and it says that it can respond to an HTTP GET request. That is why we have this GET here. And in order to test this endpoint, we have to make an HTTP GET request into this /weather forecast endpoint that we have here. There are two ways of doing this. One of them is to click on here that will expand this out, and I can say try it now, execute, and as you can see, we're making an HTTP GET request into this URL, and that is giving us this response that we have here. The other way of testing this is to do it directly through Google Chrome. I will paste this URL here and I will press enter, and now as you can see we have the same response here in the user's browser. Now maybe you are seeing something different. Maybe you are not seeing this in this friendly manner. That is because I have an extension called JSON View that beautifies this JSON response. So let me go to Google, let's say JSON View Chrome, and that will take me into this page, and here I can click on this link and you are going to see that we have JSON View, which is an extension for Google Chrome. I can install it, but I already have it, and with this I can go back here and this should be beautified. Now you may have a problem with HTTPS on your computer. That is because you need to install and trust a self-signed certificate on your machine. This is really easy to do with the .NET CLI. Let's go back to Visual Studio Code and do that. I will stop running the application and I do that by pressing Ctrl+C, and now I will write the following command: .NET dev search https --trust .NET dev search https --trust, and I'll press enter, and in my case it says that a prompt will be shown if there was not previously a certificate installed, because in my case I already have that. I didn't get any prompt, but if you do, then click on yes in order to install the certificate, and then after that you have to come here to Chrome. You may have to close it, so I will close it, and then you did have to say .NET run one more time, and by the way you have to close all instances of Chrome, not only the one that you have with your web API, and then you'll come here, open this one more time, and you can go for example to Swagger, and you shouldn't have any more problems with HTTPS. In this video, I am going to teach you how to create and run a combined project. What do I mean by a combined project? Well, that is one in which the ASP.NET Core, Web API, and also the React application live in the same project, so they are completely together. Honestly, that is not the way that we're going to work in this course, because usually in real life you have those two separated, and also because I have found that the tooling in Visual Studio for this kind of project is not that good. But still, I will teach you how to create a project and how to run it, just in case you're interested in that. So let me open Visual Studio and let me go to create new project, and in here I will write in this bar, I will write React because I'm looking for ASP.NET Core with React or ASP.NET Core with React and Redux. In my case, I want to use only the React version. We're going to talk about Redux as a bonus of this course. So let me click on next and let me say combine project is going to be the name, and let me copy this address and let me paste that here, and let me click on next, and I will use .NET 6, configure for HTTPS and create. And this is going to create our project. Now here we have our solution, here we have our project, and in here we have controllers, weather forecast controller as we have seen before, but we also have this client app folder in which we have this package.json, which means that it is here that we have our front-end application, our React application. And here we're going to see my first complaint about this technique, and it is that here we have React 16, but that is not the latest version of React, which means that when you use this combined project technique, this combined project model, you get an old version of React, which may not have all the features that you need for your front-end development. If you wanted to use the latest version of React, you would have to update this project yourself. And sometimes it is not so easy. Sometimes when I have tried to do that, I found errors along the way. So you need to be prepared to do some tinkering, some configuration in order to get it to work. Now that is one thing. Another thing that I don't like is that, as you may know, the first thing that you need in order to run a JavaScript project is to run npm install. Now when you do npm install in Visual Studio through Visual Studio, sometimes it just hangs up and it never responds. So what I have to do is to go back to the Explorer and go to the combined project, client app. Here we have the package.json, and in here right click, open PowerShell window here, and in here I have to say npm install, enter, because otherwise, as I told you, in Visual Studio sometimes this process just never finishes. So that is why I prefer to do it from here, because it is more stable. And here we have that this has ended. And now let's go back here to Visual Studio and let me test our application. Let me press Ctrl F5, which will run our React.js solution and our ASP.NET Core web application, and this is loading. And as you can see, we have our application here. Here we have several pages. I can go to counter, I can interact with the application, I can go to fetch data, and I can see that this works. So this is fine, but another thing that I don't like about using Visual Studio for this is that sometimes it just fails. Sometimes I may try to run the application one more time and it just doesn't work, and I have to close Visual Studio and then open Visual Studio one more time and then try again. So this is why I personally don't like to use Visual Studio for developing React application or almost any other front-end technology, because it just doesn't work that much, especially compared to Visual Studio Code. So that is in part why in this course we are going to use Visual Studio Code for developing the React part of our project and Visual Studio for developing our web API. But if you want to use Visual Studio, then you can go ahead. But please keep in mind that you need to make sure to be using the latest version of React, or at least the same one that I am using in this course, because otherwise, the code that I write in this course may not work for you. We saw that React is a library that helps us to create user interfaces. With React, we will be able to have applications that use a component paradigm. With React, we have a lot of flexibility to choose the development tools we want. Nothing is imposed on us. We are free to choose what we want to work with. With React, we are going to work what is known as the front end, that is, the part with which the user interacts directly. ASP.NET Core is a modern, cross-platform development framework optimized for high-demand cloud scenarios, not to be confused with the old ASP.NET that only worked on Windows. With ASP.NET Core, we can have a web API with which we will have the business logic of our application centralized, and also the data access layer with which we will interact safely with a database. With ASP.NET Core, we will work on the backend of our application. We prepared the development environment by installing Node, Visual Studio Code, among others. In addition, we created the React and ASP.NET Core application, which we will develop throughout this course.